January 23rd on a Wednesday. It's 9:06. 9 a.m. edition. Coming up this hour, we're going to take a look at area events brought to you by Keith Superstores. It's also William Carey Wednesday. Dr. Connie Roberts, director of the Winter School of Music at William Carey, is going to join us. Going to be talking about the production of Thoroughly Modern Millie. And we have Dr. Kelly Cronin with Cronin Family Dentistry scheduled to be on the program. But let's jump right into it because we have a topic that may actually end up taking 2 segments this morning. But joining me in studio from Anatomies, Patrick and Nathan. Morning, guys. Good morning. And we are live on Facebook. If you go to Anatomies Facebook page, you can watch us in studio, which is totally why I got in the radio. This modern technology, it's killing me. I start to realize my age when stuff like all this stuff comes up. So I don't want anyone to see me. Yeah, I have no choice nowadays. But we have a very interesting topic this morning. And Patrick, I'm going to let you introduce our guest today.
Yeah, well, I appreciate that. And we're joined today by Mitzi Spears, who's been a friend of Anatomies for, decades, right?
Mm-hmm.
You've been connected to the facility, and she and her husband do tremendous work. And we've talked over the past, 12, 18 months, just throwing around different methods that we could help impact our population when it comes to anxiety and depression. So I reached out to her recently when we were looking at doing a Hello Life segment, which we will produce with Mitzi because she has so much knowledge and information. And she mentioned that she's been working and studying on the topic of exercise when it comes to treatments of trauma. And so that just opens up this whole gamut of questions like what is trauma and why are different people susceptible and more susceptible or less susceptible. So just before the show aired, just hearing her talk about some of this, it's a fascinating topic, and I think it's something that impacts every one of our lives. So there's some information here that will be very, very beneficial for people to hear and understand. So I guess we should start with Mitzi. Just talk about yourself and how you got into this field and the impact that you and your organization is making.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate it. I'm with Retreat Counseling Center, and I do a lot of work with trauma survivors, suicide survivors. I experienced a suicide in my family 28 years ago this month, and at that point, I began therapy for trauma, did a lot of work, and then eventually got in this field, and so that's kind of my passion. And so now I've been studying about trauma, learning more, in the process of writing a book about it. And what's really interesting to me is how trauma is self-defined. What's traumatic for you is not traumatic for me, maybe, or for you. And that's really interesting how our brains work for me to integrate that with exercise. And how does exercise work with trauma?
Right. Could you just elaborate a little bit about like the different forms of trauma?
Mm-hmm. There's a lot of different forms of trauma. I'm seeing more and more people that have had trauma as children. So they have childhood trauma either from neglect or something's happened to them very young. They've had sexual abuse, neglect, things that happened to them in school. I hear more and more things about bullying when they were very young, maybe teachers that didn't understand what they were going through. For instance, I have a young girl who has social anxiety who was made fun of by teachers because she was shy. All of these things have been very traumatic.
Right, and one child could process that and not really have any issues with it, and then the next child, it triggers something.
That's probably why a lot of teachers just did a blanket reaction to it. We've come so far in understanding trauma,
yes.
And it's generational, where you talk to some people and they may think that's just part of growing up, that's
yes.
how it is, but we've come beyond that, and a lot of teachers now have to go through that training to recognize that.
Well, I think in the old days, when I was growing up.
Old days.
I really hate to say that, but it's true. One of the things that we looked at is, well, if you're shy, take a speech class. Get up there and learn how to talk in front of people. Well, that may work for you and me, but that doesn't work for everybody.
Right.
So childhood trauma, also with our society the way it is, we can turn on the TV and there's violence, there's children are watching things online much younger.
And do you think, I don't want to interrupt, but do you think that that's making the population more susceptible to the impacts of trauma? Because it seems like, Michael, that, and we were talking about this just briefly right before, but it's like we're so much more vulnerable as a population, or else we're just overdiagnosed. But it's like the things that that are labeled traumatic and the extreme decisions that it's leading some people to make. I didn't understand that, when I was coming up. I mean, we had issues, but not like today.
Yeah.
So I was just curious, like, what's the common denominator? What is triggering the population to react in these ways to the same stresses?
So Mitzi, with all the different forms of trauma, why? Do you think that exercise is helpful in aiding the healing process with the different forms of trauma?
I think for most treatment, it's essential, and part of that is the way that your brain processes trauma. Often, this was true for me, and often when I get clients in, if you've been traumatized, sometimes you cannot even put into words what your body is feeling. When we experience trauma, it goes to this, what they used to call the primitive part of the brain, the amygdala and the hippocampus, and it goes to this part of the brain where all your emotions are, but it does not pass through the thinking part of your brain. So what that leaves you with, and that's a real condensed version, but what that leaves you with is when someone goes through a trauma, they can't process what's past and what's present, what's real and what's not real. So they start having flashbacks in their day-to-day life. There's several things, trouble processing information, the memory becomes fragmented. I may have seen something in the trauma that I process, and it may be totally wrong, but it's my perception of it. You have difficulty discriminating between past and present, and also your facts are all off. So you can't go forward with it. So one of the important things is just to start to feel safe in your own body. So one of the things that I work with clients on is grounding first. How do you feel safe in your own body? Take your shoes off, stand up, feel the ground. Start walking. Something that's bilateral, using both parts of your body. Walking. Starting to just move your body. That's the hardest thing to do when you're depressed and anxious.
Yeah.
Right.
Because you become lethargic, and that feeling of giving up, automatically I think in order to deal with that, we try to relax and shut society out and just sit down alone and not do anything.
There's a lot of isolating.
Yeah.
One thing, if you go to someplace like Anatomies, when you're in the throes of depression, anxiety, it's really hard to walk in a place and say, I want to sign up and exercise. If you're already exercising, it makes it a little bit easier. So that's one reason I say across the board to exercise.
Right.
You go to a place like Anatomies, you're also going to have a support group there. Because as you show up, people get to know you. They know your name. They'll start holding you accountable. And that helps your sense of, this is my place.
Emotionally, it's like a reconnect.
Yes, absolutely.
They
may not have any other support in the world.
And that's their form of community.
And it's a real community, because I think one of the reasons why we're seeing this becoming so more prevalent in this issue raising is because of social media, and that people are putting their lives and their societies are based online. There's no human interaction. It's not real, but that is in their mind reality. This is the world to me, and that's why we see people just stuck in their phones all the time. And when they are in social situations, they don't know how to act or react to various things. And
you see a lot more social anxiety now.
Yeah.
Because people don't know how to act, so they bring their phone. It's really hard, and also
and I've seen people do that where you can tell they're uncomfortable. The phone comes out and they just go off in the corner. Just that's a comfortable world that they can deal with.
I'll also have people coming into me that believe that the whole world is doing great, because on Facebook they're so happy.
The highlight reel.
They're the only ones that aren't.
Right.
But you know, when you go through a trauma is anything that causes emotional, physical, spiritual, or mental harm to you. And I did want to say this because it's really important that trauma is a normal response to a deeply disturbing event. It's a normal response. And it overwhelms my ability to cope.
Right. We're up against the break. I'm going to hold you guys on through because this is a really interesting topic, and again, an area of exercise and staying fit that people don't consider when it comes to our overall just being healthy and living and getting through our days. We always associate exercise and going to a gym with looking good, feeling great instantaneously that way, but we don't think about the mental well-being, the social, especially in today's society. So we're going to continue our conversation with Mitzi Spears. 9 a.m. edition continues next. Plus, it's William Carey Wednesday. Stay with us on SuperTalk Hattiesburg 97.3.
This is a powerful topic.
It is.
This is profound.
Are we still on?
We're on line.
But that's okay.
But it's kind of still
And I guess that's what people in breaks is like, okay, now there's a little break. You know? But you know,
So I'm going to go more into exercise.
absolutely.
Right.
That and we'll do the next segment.
Because I really like the natural release of endorphins.
Yeah, that's what I wanted to say.
It's just like, how many times have all of us, Pat, you come in upset, frustrated,
I don't know.
and then you...
What time is it? I've already done it.
Right, is it already happened? And you come in and you just,
Yeah.
you're upset or just, and then you work out, and then at the end you're like, man, I just feel so
If I had
Totally
just done this earlier.
Yeah.
Totally
you know,
different.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's, and I watched George go through, that's why it's so real to me, is I watched that depression, and then now the stresses that drove him deep into depression are on me, and I'm fighting. I'm like, I'm not gonna dig that hole.
That's
You
right.
know what I'm saying?
Because it would be
And,
easy to do the same thing.
It's insane, you know, and, but my story's no different than anybody else's.
Mhm.
You know, everybody is facing, if you're breathing, facing some significant challenge.
Oh, yeah.
And it's like, where do you process that? How do you channel that? And so,
Yeah, Bill just said last night, he was stressing about something. He said, you know, I can't let this kill me.
no.
I mean, he was like numb on one side of his face, and his blood pressure went up, and I was like,
Well, this is hard.
it's not
Yeah.
that important. And you know, once he got himself like calmed down, he was like, oh, that, you know, that's because stress kills you.
Right.
It does.
And it just eats you away.
Yeah,
It's
it's
a
terrible.
slow
Yeah, and
deterioration.
even if your life's not extended by 60 seconds,
Mhm.
is it better? Is it better life?
Right.
And you know, that's the thing.
And you know, the truth is, healing from trauma is a long process. It is not short.
Mhm.
It is not a quick fix. I exercised before, you know, I've always exercised from the time I was 20. And so it's a good thing because afterwards, if I wouldn't have had jogging and all that, I don't know that I would have made it. That was my extra.
That's right.
Mhm.
And I've known several families that have coped with significant issues, and they've turned to exercise almost out of extremities. I mean, it's like early and slow down a little bit, but it's their
Yeah,
way.
you have to watch that.
It's their way of coping, and it
It's a
initiates-
healthy way because there's
It is.
unhealthy ways.
That's right, and it initiates a healing, and it takes years. You know,
Oh,
and
yeah.
grief is something because you'll be fine for 6 weeks, and all of a sudden something will hit you out of left field, and you know, it's just you're reliving it.
You can't, and the other thing is you can't always prepare for everything. You know, you get yourself prepared, like,
Right.
okay, I'm going to this, I'm just gonna be sad because he's not there, blah, blah, blah. And then out of the blue, you're somewhere in a song contest.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right.
January 23rd on a Wednesday, it's 9:20 coming up. Just before the top of the hour, we'll take a look at area events brought to you by Key Superstores. It's also William Carey Wednesday. Dr. Connie Roberts is going to join us. She's director of the Winter School of Music musical, or their winter musical, Thoroughly Modern Millie. And of course, we always put focus on William Carey University. every single Wednesday at 9:36. But we continue our conversation with Anatomies. Patrick and Nathan are in studio with us, as well as Mitzi Spears, and we're talking about trauma, the importance of exercise, and before we went into the break, really kind of hit on sort of a revelation that I think we're all aware of, but in today's society, we just ignore it because it's the norm. Everyone's got their nose stuck in their phone. That is their world. Social media is how they define themselves. It is where they find themselves, their importance. They put everything into social media now. And if they're not in social media, if they aren't getting likes, then there's something wrong. And then they put more focus into it. And because of that, from social aspects, they don't know how to react or respond to various things. And Patrick was bringing up at the top of the interview why we're seeing this so much more now. Trauma isn't anything new. Everyone deals with trauma differently, various things, but it does seem to be increased. And it just seems like society has become so connected that we're becoming disconnected at the same time.
You know, trauma too, that our society is so much more violent. So you have children growing up in homes where there's drugs and shootings and drive-by shootings and violence. You also have, when I started in this field, there were, I went into the work of suicide prevention. There were 30,000 suicides a year in the United States. Now there's 45,000 suicides a year in the United States.
That's a 50% increase.
Which is much more than homicides, much more. And that's stress, that's depression, that's anxiety, that's trauma.
Yeah. And that self-worth, that's lost again because we're putting our self-worth on something that's not really tangible in society.
It's not reality.
Yeah.
Exercise helps with that too. Just for the normal population that's not traumatized, when you exercise, it helps your self-esteem, it helps your connection, it helps, you walk in and you're stressed and you don't feel good and you walk out and you think, oh, okay, I feel a little bit better. Most people do after they've been exercising. So you take someone who's under trauma or under stress and they go in and it helps them. Also, when you exercise vigorously, then it lets off endorphins and hormones that help you with your depression, anxiety, help you sleep better, which is really big for people with PTSD. People who've experienced trauma have a difficult time sleeping because of flashbacks.
And that only magnifies the problem. Sleep
Lack of
deprivation
sleep
is
to me is the most dangerous thing because you can actually go crazy from lack of sleep.
And I'm so fascinated by the endorphins. It's a natural high. You hear of the runner's high. It's working out the same. Can you just talk a little bit more about that?
Most of us are looking for a way to feel better. And there's healthy coping and there's unhealthy coping. And many people today turn to alcohol and drugs just to feel better. Or sex, or whatever's the next thing that's going to help me forget and feel better. Exercise does that in a healthy way. Exercise can help me feel better, but not alter me where I can't do the work I need to do.
Right.
And that's really important because then we can pass on healthy coping to our children. Some of our children exercise with their children, so you're starting them from a young age in ways to cope with their stress. Children are under tremendous stress in school.
Oh, yeah.
Young children.
Yeah, and that's another thing that parents don't realize. We all assume that it's still the same as when
No,
we were
I've helped
kids.
them with their homework. There is stress.
You're stressed.
That's not how I learned it.
Exactly. I'm stressed thinking about that because I hear
Oh,
horror
it's
stories
coming.
about that.
It's coming. It's like, no, that's not how you do that. And then you're doing it, and my daughter will look at me and she's like,
That's not the way.
that's
Right.
not right.
And then they come home with an F and they're blaming you.
That's old math, Dad.
Yeah,
Oh, blame the parent.
What happened? But that's right, society, and we put it on ourselves, though. We keep piling it on. and we don't have to do that. But again, it comes down to, and I understand the endorphins. I don't drink or do drugs or smoke because I know what exercise does and that high. It also comes down to a control issue. I think we're very, as a society, we're willing to just let other things control. We're being raised to understand or believe that it's okay to let something else guide you and lead you instead of doing things yourself. And that's where people fall into that pit.
It's hard work.
Yeah.
You know, overcoming trauma, working on yourself, working yourself out of a hole of depression and anxiety is hard work. You know, some things that you can do if you've experienced trauma, if you have depression, anxiety, exercise is a great thing. Sometimes that's not enough. That's just a tool. You know, you have to have a toolkit. So I did want to say that if you have experienced trauma, the first thing you want to do is get moving. Get up out of the bed.
And that's the trick. How do you approach that? Because I've been not in an overwhelming state, but even just something that happens, death in the family, you don't feel like doing anything. You don't want to get up and move.
Absolutely.
And it's that motivation. It's tough. What do you suggest to someone? Because you know, how many of us have done that? We've been at home, stuck, sitting down, thinking, I've got to do something. I've got to, all day, I've got to get up.
Well, the stresses of life just kind of take over, and you're like, that's the last thing I want to do right now is work out. And it's actually probably the first thing you should do.
Or bathe.
Right.
You know, it's like,
Well, that's right. You can always exercise and then bathe.
Right.
To get moving and to not isolate are the two most important things, and to sleep. And then I'll have people say, but I'm sleeping too much. That's when we need to get moving.
Right.
When you try those things, you know, research shows that people who go to therapy, and they're still doing more research, but so far the research shows people who go to therapy and people who go to therapy and exercise for trauma, that it is more successful if there's exercise. As little as 30 minutes 3 times a week. If you can't do 30 minutes, 3 times a day, 10 minutes. What I tell people is start out walking to the mailbox. You know, now, as an older person, I can say that. When I was young, I would say if I couldn't jog 6 miles, why bother? Well, that's not true. I wish I would have learned that very young. That if I am not walking and I walk around the block, I'm putting steps in, I'm moving. I am going to feel better. So that's another thing. Also,
even parking at the end of the parking lot when you're shopping,
I actually
which I've been
do that.
doing for like 20 years. People always ask, why are you parking all the way out here? It's something.
That's right. It's
forcing
steps.
myself to walk.
Or take the steps instead of an elevator.
Yeah.
Something small. It can start at a small, and then you slowly kind of start increasing.
And you know, when you're hurting emotionally, physically, mentally, or spiritually, that's hard to do. So, you know, it's important to be able to give yourself credit for that. Okay, I didn't run 6 miles. I walked.
Yeah.
It seems like, just listening to this, that it's a step toward empowering yourself. Because, you know, victims of trauma, and certainly I'm not educated enough to say this with any authority, but it seems like that, you know, being a victim, you've lost all ability to make decisions for yourself. That you know, you're being controlled, or basically you're sidelined, and you're out of the equation. And all right, I choose to walk to that mailbox. There's a victory in that. You know, hey, stepping out of the house, parking at the end of the parking lot, you know, walking into a facility, challenging myself to meet a new person. And each little step, as little as it is planting a seed of empowerment until, you know, this healing process, which is a journey, as Mitzi has outlined, you know, continues and becomes a lifestyle of recovery. And
recovering from trauma, you're right, you lose yourself. You can't control your thoughts. I could be sitting here, someone with trauma could be sitting here having flashbacks and they can't control it. You have intrusive thoughts, you're in the middle of doing something and bam, you're in the middle of the trauma. So it's looking for things that you can control. And if you, one of the most important things that you can learn in all this is how to take care of yourself.
Right. Sure.
And there's mindfulness, there's breathe. That's the first thing that we have to learn. You have to, thank God I learned some of that in exercise. How do you breathe?
Sure.
In session, I'll say, breathe, and they go.
Well, this is a topic we could have covered an entire hour on this today, but a very important topic. I'm so glad we were able to talk about it. And Mitzi, if people want to contact you, what should they do?
The first thing you can do is you can email Mitzi Spears, MITZISPEARS @AOL.com or 601-310-8357, or on the web, go to Retreat Counseling Center or Spears Retreat Counseling Center.
Fantastic.
I'll be happy to put you in the right direction, put you in touch with who you need to get in touch with.
And even Anatomies, we can find out more at
Please.
Anatomies.com.
Absolutely.
Well, guys, thank you so much for
Hey,
coming.
thank you guys so
Thank
much.
you for
Mitzi,
having
me.
Thanks for bringing this up. Very important topic.
Thank you,
I
Mitzi.
appreciate it.
All right, 9 a.m. edition continues next. It's William Carey Wednesday. Stay with us on SuperTalk Hattiesburg 97.3.
Very good. Great job, Mitzi.
Yeah, that's powerful.
Yeah.
You need to push a button?
Yes.
Mhm.
Give us 10 seconds.